Not at all. So Josh and I were colleagues.
Yep.
Okay. Well, great.
I'm still in the same office space, Katie. Look
Are
at
you
me.
really?
On Lincoln Center right here.
There you go.
Okay. Well, welcome to the Wise Center Power Hours. So today is Wednesday, September 22nd. I can't even believe. Do I have the right day? Yeah, I do have the right day, the 22nd. I can't believe it's like, almost towards the end of September. So today we're really going to be talking a lot about business entity, and we've got Katie Centolella with us, who is the expert today, and then Dana Zanders. Dana is also another one of the Wise coach counselors here to be able to support you. Say hi, Dana.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
So before we start, I just want to tell just a couple of updates I'd like to tell you about what's going on at the Wise Center. Number one, the Wise Women's Business Center is here to help support you as a business owner. We help women be able to really take that thought, that process, that thing that they want to put out in the world, and really be able to support you in being able to be successful in your business. And there's so many resources. We do that by online learning. You can go to our website, thewisecenter.org, and be able to take a look at all the resources that are available there for you. We offer different classes, which I'm going to be talking about, but most importantly, you don't have to do it on your own. We offer free one-to-one counseling that we can be able to be here. That's Dana has joined the team, and myself, and then there is Sarita. We are three that will be able to be there to help you. But importantly, always stay in touch with what's going on in the Wise Center. We've got a lot of resource, and there's always some type of a class that's going on. Recently in the summer, we put together a accelerated business plan intensive, and it was an amazing journey for 8 weeks with individual. We actually met for 7. We took a break. But at the end of 8 weeks, you will have a business plan. And what's really great about this is that you get the support and the guidance to be able to walk you through the plan, to be able to go to a bank, or maybe it's just going to be really diving in to get some clarity on what it is that you really want to be able to do. So I think that Carolyn will be putting a link to that if you're interested. There are still a few openings. We're going to be starting on September 30th. So please join us and at least take a look at the information and joining us for this business intensive. The other thing that I'm really, really excited about is that during COVID, we have not really been able to see clients in the center. And we can now see some clients. Most part, a lot of people would still like to do Zoom or phone. But on October 6th, Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month from 4 to 6:30, we're going to be having an open house. So please come and join us, see what's going on. You'll be able to meet other women entrepreneurs, be able to take a self-guided tour of what we've been doing in the center. Also, you're going to be having a resource fair, and we're going to do some hot seat coaching. So please join us. And then after that, it's just going to be meet and greet, and we will have some food trucks out in the court. So we would love to be able to have you, and I'd love to be able to meet you. So Kia, welcome. And with that, Dana, would you like to add anything?
Well, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for being here. As Barb mentioned, I am one of the business coaches at the Wise, and we have Katie here today, and I think it's going to be a great experience for everybody.
Yes, because today's subject is all about your legal formation and what are some of the things that you really need to be able to look at. What are some of the different entities that you can do, and why would you want to do that? And most importantly, I'm going to talk a little bit about finding that right lawyer to be there for you. So Katie, with that, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. And could you please introduce yourself and then take it away?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you guys for inviting me. I got connected to Wise because I started seeing a number of clients that said, "Oh, Wise referred us here. My Wise coach, suggested that we talk," and I just was delighted, particularly because your clients came to me and they were pretty well organized. They were ready. They were looking for that lawyer for their team, and so it was just really exciting. It was nice to get a client that was that well organized to come. So I've been an attorney now for 17 years. Which seems like a really long time. And my focus is exclusively on business. I represent clients throughout the life cycle of their business, from their formation, during their sort of life cycle with contracts and issues that come up during life, and including selling their business or acquiring new businesses. So that's kind of the whole life spectrum of or whole life cycle of a business. And that's what I do. And that's what I've done in my entire practice. I happen to be an entrepreneur myself. I work out of my own firm. I used to be with a larger firm for many years, which was great. And it gave me great foundations, but I really love being my own boss. And I really love working with other female entrepreneurs. So that's how I got connected to Wise. And that's why I'm really excited today to talk about the sort of the beginnings of business, and that's business formation, but also a little bit to talk, as Barb mentioned, about how you even go about hiring a lawyer to represent you in your business, which for a lot of entrepreneurs, this is the first time they've hired a lawyer outside of somebody to buy a house or do a will. It's a completely different area of law, and a lot of people can stumble there. So I'm happy to talk about that too.
Just had to unmute myself. So tell us a little bit, when somebody comes to you and starts saying, okay, I want to put this business out, what are some of the questions that you might ask them to be able to say, are you really ready? And what formation do you need to go to?
Yeah. So, sometimes I'll get clients who come to me because they want to be talked out of having to form an entity. It's like, oh, I just don't want to spend the money. And then I'll have clients who come to me, they're like, I need an entity. Let's get going. I ask them both the same questions, which is, okay, let's give me the view from 30,000 feet. What are you selling? How far along are you in this? How many clients or customers do you have? And what sort of risks are there in your business? So if a client comes to me and they're selling, widgets, they're selling them online in online sales. So nobody's coming to their house or to a physical location. It's a widget that even comes with its own warranty, for instance. There's ultimately very little risk in their business, very little. And they are selling at most, $500 they have $500 of profit, maybe, if they're lucky, a month. So their business is young, it's fledgling, there's low risk. And they basically have the choice between taking $1,000 and investing it in marketing, or taking $1,000 and investing it in setting up an entity. Generally, we have that conversation of like, I think you can wait. I think you can deploy this $1,000 at growing your business. And here are some of the triggers by which I want you to come back to me, and then we'll incorporate you or set up an LLC. Because I think that there's a better use for this $1,000 than spending it for filing fees to New York and to pay me to set up your entity. Others will come to me and they'll say, and this was one that came maybe a year ago. They said, okay, well, we're going to sell feminine products, feminine like toys. And we are going to have parties at people's houses with alcohol. But we haven't made a lot of money yet, but this is my business. And I say, that's high risk. Here's all the risks that could happen in that business. So again, it's a widget, but it's a widget that's being sold in person. And there's other risks associated with it. So even though the sales are the same, the risks are different. And so it's time for that person to form an entity. So it's not always a black and white, well, if you have X number of dollars in revenue, definitely it's time. Or if you have X number of risks, it's definitely time. It's a weighing of all of the factors. And that's usually the very first part of the conversation we have is it time for you to form an entity? Or are you okay to continue in this like sole proprietorship or DBA? Sometimes it's okay. And that's the best use of whatever limited resources that entrepreneur may have at the time. and that's completely acceptable. Sometimes they're exposing their own personal assets at a level that I think is too high. And that's when we talk about getting an entity in place to run the business. And again, the entity is there predominantly to be this protective shell, to keep your own personal life and everything that is not a part of the business protected from what may happen inside.
Great. So somebody comes to you and they just say they got this widget that's really low, low risk. And so now you tell them, okay, DBA, but here are some of the things that might, when you reach this milestone, you want to come back, let's take a look at it. But when you end up telling them to go ahead with the DBA, what else do they need? Like EIN number, insurance, and what else would you recommend?
You don't need an EIN. Sometimes the bank wants you to have a separate one. If you want to get a loan, usually you need both an entity and an EIN. But generally you need a DBA. So a DBA, for those who don't know, is essentially gives you permission to sell things under a name that's not your own. Technically in New York, it's illegal to call yourself anything that is not your own name and then solicit to sell things that way. So you have to file, and it's a DBA is sort of the lump sum name for it. It's an assumed name certificate or sort of a doing business as name. Or in the case of Onondaga County, it's simply a business certificate that you have to get to use that name. And so that's essential. But I would also say a customer agreement. Sometimes we have clients who don't yet invest money in getting an LLC, but it is worth their while to invest in having an agreement, a standard template to use with their customers. Particularly in online sales situations, I see a lot of times their widgets are being sold online and there's some very boilerplate terms of sale that don't discuss refund policy, that don't discuss defective goods, returns. Some of those are required, right, and for sales in New York, or certainly if your sales are going outside of New York, different states have different rules. But you're exposing yourself to, you may have no intention of making refunds. It may be that you are open to making refunds, but within a limited period of time. If your terms of sale don't define that, then you're at the whims of your customer and state law. So sometimes the investment in a customer agreement, for instance, is a better use of money if you have limited money than setting up an entity, because that's protecting you out of the gate.
Great.
Okay, great. I have a question. So you talked a little bit about the DBA. You talked a little bit about someone coming to you and asking the questions to determine what type of business entity they should form. Can you talk a little bit about the time frame? What if someone comes to you and say, how long does it take for me to either set up a DBA and or form a business entity? What does that look like? And then maybe the different ways that it can be done?
Yeah, so until about a month ago when we had this conversation, I would always say, oh, it can be done in 24 hours. We can get it done really quickly. And then New York flipped over their system, their entire software for forming entities. And for like 3 weeks, we couldn't form anything except through the mail. And it was very slow. That appears to be fixed. So now we can form entities again, pretty much in less than 24 hours. DBAs, if you do it by mail, it takes a couple days, or you can physically go right to the county clerk and do it instantly. So that can be pretty quick. So the short answer is very fast, which is another reason for clients to wait until they really need one, because I don't need a lot of lead time to set it up. And the huge caveat to that, of course, and I don't know if any of your clients are in this boat, but that's professional entities. So, we're talking about LLCs or corporations. If you happen to provide a licensed service, like you're a licensed social worker, for instance, or you're a physical therapist, you need a professional entity. So professional corporation or professional limited liability company. Those are taking months to form now, because you need to have an approval or consent by the Department of Education before you can form, and they're completely backlogged by like months. So that's the caveat to that. But as long as it's not a professional entity and you're not providing licensed services, then it's very quick.
Okay. Can you, Katie, talk a little bit about the difference between an LLC, an S Corp, and then going to a C Corp? When would from a 10,000 foot level view, what would that look like?
Yeah, so there's kind of a waterfall of questions to go through when deciding an entity type. Out of the gate, we want to understand who's going to own this entity. A lot of times it's just one person. And that gives you kind of the most flexibility to choose an entity that meets your needs. So if we're talking about just one person, right, your options are an LLC, if you're going to have an entity, an LLC, or a corporation at the New York level, like an LLC or a corporation. Now, corporations have two types, but those are all tax types. So out of the gate, what I want to always make clear to people is, from a liability protection perspective, they're identical. You have liability protection in these entities, that shield that you're looking for, which is why you form an LLC in the first place. The difference between them is tax, income tax, and also somewhat employment taxes. So when I'm talking here, I'm talking about tax differences, because liability, it's completely identical. So if you're that single owner and you have an LLC, as far as the IRS is concerned, that LLC doesn't exist. They call it disregarded. So you pick up any income or loss or business expense on your own individual income tax return on a Schedule C, which is very similar to what they do as a DBA, just a Schedule C. So same thing in New York. If you are an S corporation, so S is in Sam, which stands for the subchapter in the tax code that creates this taxation classification, then it's also similar taxation. You pick it up on your personal return. You have to file a tax return for that S corporation, but you don't pay tax on it. It's called an informational return. And then you take the results and put that on your personal return, and that's where you pay taxes. Excuse me. A C corporation is what people consider that sort of old-fashioned old corporation, where there's dividends and the corporation is a taxpayer and it pays taxes. And, as a result of Trump's tax reform, its tax bracket is lower than it ever used to be. However, once the money leaves the corporation and goes into your hands, you also pay tax. So that's what we refer to as double taxation. So C corporations have double taxation. The entity pays tax on the profits, and then when it distributes out profits to the owner, you pay tax on the dividends. So that's C Corps. It's usually people only structure as C Corps if they're sort of a startup looking for investors planning on growing exponentially. So if you think of like anybody who's planning to go to an incubator and get a seed investment, and then round A and round B, those are C Corps, and they have to be structured that way for investment purposes. Usually when I'm talking to clients coming out of Ys or small business owners, we're having a conversation between LLCs and S corporations. Mm-hmm. So the S corporation presently has a benefit when it comes to employment taxes. And every year since I've been in practice, we always say this caveat to clients: one of these days, they're going to close this loophole. And this loophole is, as you may or may not know, as self-employed folks, you pick up both ends of the employment tax, the employee end and the employer end, because you're self-employed. And an LLC, same thing goes. Any profits, you both pick up and pay employment taxes on both sides, the employer side and the employee side. In an S corp, you pay yourself wages as though you were just any other W-2 employee for your services. An example, you are the accountant for your business and you're the owner. And so you pay yourself $50,000 a year in your accountant services. And if there's $50,000 of profits, you pay yourself that at the end of the year as a distribution. You pay both sides of the employment tax on that $50,000 salary, but not on the distribution part. So there is some employment tax savings. How long that lasts, we don't know. The salary you pay yourself has to be considered reasonable. And so sometimes it doesn't make sense in businesses. If you're not making a certain threshold of revenue in your company, it doesn't also make sense to add the complexity of a separate tax return in an S Corp. S Corps are limited as to who can own them. You have to be a US citizen. You have to be either another S Corp owner, meaning you can have multiple S Corp owners, or you have to be a person. So there are limitations. There's also limitations on, so if you're going to have multiple owners, there's limitations on how you can structure ownership in an S Corp. And the last point about S Corps that I make to clients is, if you are unsure, start as an LLC. Because as I said at the beginning of this, the taxation piece that's only taxation. an LLC can technically be taxed as an S corporation. So you don't want to form as a corporation who is taxed as an S corporation. If you are unsure, instead form as an LLC. And then later down the road, if it looks like it's better to be an S corporation, that's a simple election. It's a checkbox on a form that goes to the IRS. So you may run across this, and I see it regularly, is an LLC that is taxed as an S corporation. Totally legit, and it gives you the flexibility to start first as an LLC, especially if you don't have a lot of revenue, not worry about the extra reporting requirements of an S corp, but down the road, make that S election. What you can't do is go backwards. You can't take an S corporation that's formed as a corporation and go backwards to an LLC, not without cost.
What about going from a DBA to an LLC? What's the transition? That was a great explanation about the LLC and S corp. But what about DBA to LLC?
That's very simple. We just simply form your LLC, and ideally in the same name you've been using as a DBA. It may not always be possible because many people can have the same DBA. McDonald's, for instance, is just a DBA of a legal entity, and there's a gazillion McDonald's, right? So, but when it comes time to form a legal entity, there can only be one in the state with that name. So it may be that we can't use the name you've been using as a DBA. So we form it under a different name. And then that name, and then you get a DBA for that legal entity that's the same. So ultimately you can continue to use that DBA, but we have to move it by essentially filing a new DBA under the name of your LLC, if that name is not available to use as your actual legal name.
And then does that also hold true? Let's say that I have formed an LLC or a sole proprietorship and I have an EIN and I need to change it to another business formation. Do I keep my EIN?
You have to know. You can't keep your EINs are not transferable. So you'll have to get a new EIN for your new entity, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, one of the things, Katie, we talked about when we met was that a lot of times some clients may not going to take a look at the cost of a lawyer and so forth. So, and then they might think about doing it on their own. They can go to New York State but what are some of the pitfalls, or what are some of the things that they might need to really look into as they're walking down that road?
Sure. There's a couple. So as you say, New York allows you to form entities online. You can form business corporations, which is just corporations, and you can form LLCs directly through the Secretary of State's website. In doing so, they'll ask you a series of questions, and you have to know the answers to those questions. And a lot of people don't, or they choose wrong. In addition, by forming an entity through the New York State Secretary of State's website, your entity formation is not complete. New York has this archaic rule that requires you to publish for 6 weeks in 2 newspapers in order to complete formation. I mean, technically you're formed as soon as you file, but you could be dissolved if you don't follow the publication requirements. So many folks don't even know to do that. And additionally, they don't know how to do that. A LegalZoom or other sort of service like that, Clerky, etc., they also do these services. Some do or do not offer publication. Some people don't know whether they need it. So that's a pitfall. The other is you need an operating agreement and an EIN to really go, and ideally organizational resolutions that designate who makes decisions for this entity, who's the manager if there is one, who are the officers if there are some, so that you can go open a bank account, because an entity is not super useful to you if you can't go open a bank account with it. So a lot of times these services, they don't provide everything that you need in order to go to the bank and open a bank account, or in order to go to a credit card processing company and set up processing through Stripe, or et cetera. There's documents that they're going to expect you to have that you're not going to get from a service or from sort of a self-serve structure. And all of these things can be found online. The question is, do you know what is needed to, and 2, do you know how to modify them to suit your business? Not usually.
Yeah, and it's always wanting to go to the expert. Why not go, to be able to?
That's just it. It's also the time. It's also time, right? How much time are you going to spend trying to DIY your formation versus time you could spend making money in your business. It's the same. It's just the same for me. When I find myself doing something that is like administrative and not in my sweet spot, I have to pause myself, be like, why am I doing this? Like, it's costing me money. I should pay somebody else to do this so that I can do what makes me money, my like area. So that's the other element that I wish I could get into the heads of some of these entrepreneurs is it takes me so little time to form you the entity that you need. And for not a whole huge fee. And if you could deploy your resources elsewhere, where would you be so it's the time value of money component too. I mean,
what about the hybrid entrepreneurs? Let's say I am working in my business part-time and still working a full-time job. Sometimes I get the question, does it make sense for me to form an entity while working full-time? What would be your recommendation if someone came to you with that question?
Well, I do ultimately the same risk analysis that we do for anyone is what are the risks, associated with not having that legal entity. Additionally, I for those that still have other jobs, you have to ask the question of, is moonlighting even allowed in your job? Or are you contractually, prohibited from doing this? And it's one thing for an employer to discover that you've gone and filed an entity and are operating, but if you're doing it sort of quietly without an entity, it's harder to sort of determine. But if you go and file an entity, it may be a little easier to find. So if it's prohibited in the existing job, obviously that's a real red flag. But additionally, it's the exact same analysis. It's because it's not necessarily the time that they put into their business that creates the risk. It's what they're doing in their business and what assets are devoted to the business, because that's what we want to protect. Or the flip side, because the flip side is if for some reason they have significant assets outside of this business that they're doing, we certainly don't want them exposed to creditors. So that's all a part of the risk analysis, which is really the same whether they have a job, or whether they have a day job and this is their side hustle, or whether this is their full and only gig.
As we are down the road here of this power hour, is there anybody here on Facebook or that's live here that would like to ask a question of Katie as we're going forth with this discussion? Anything, ladies? Josh?
While we're waiting for that, I can sort of go through fees, if that's helpful for people to understand and know kind of the realm, because they're pretty fixed. As a matter of just actual out-of-pocket costs, there's no really getting around that. To form an LLC in New York is $200. And then generally you need a certified copy to go to the bank. So that's $10. So there you are, $210 to do that. Publication, as I said, generally runs around $275 to $300, depending on the newspapers, depending on the relationship you have with the newspapers. If you do it pretty regularly, you have a sort of a standing order. So that's just straight, hard, out-of-pocket costs. I tend to charge a flat fee of $550 to do the whole realm. Basically, that package that you would need to go to the bank, like the operating agreement, the EIN, the organizational resolutions, and the formation. And I do, and that's, and any lawyer you speak to should have a comparable kind of structure like that. There's a fee portion that's just disbursements and it is what it is. And then there's the attorney fee portion. So when it comes to, speaking to any lawyer, those are the two elements to understand. You can't really negotiate those hard disbursements. They are what they are, but the negotiation can come on the legal fee end.
Okay, great. There are no questions on Facebook. One of the things you touched base on was taking a look at potentially creating some type of a partnership, and depending upon what the entity might look like. But can you talk a little bit about creating an operating agreement for the actual partners so that they know who's on first, who's on second?
Yeah.
And why is that important?
That's critical. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's just so critical to have these conversations and get them documented before you proceed with a partnership. of any sort. So if we're talking about an operating agreement and an LLC that has multiple members, that you have to talk about voting and management and who makes the day-to-day decisions and who, is it everybody? And who makes the major decisions and who has veto rights over that? How are you sharing equity? If somebody has a service role in the business, how do they get paid for that plus profits? How are you addressing transfers? So what happens if your partner dies? What happens if they become permanently disabled? What happens if they up and leave you without notice? What happens if they leave you with notice? What happens if they leave and compete against you? What happens if they don't perform like they're supposed to? There's all of these triggers that can happen. And mostly I see a lot of my clients come to me because they have already messed this up. They have gotten into a business and they either don't have an operating agreement or they were skimping on fees and they just took a form off the internet that doesn't answer any of those questions. And so it's 3 times as expensive to fix. So I love it when clients come to me and say, look, we're just getting started. We really like each other. We want to make sure it stays that way. And that is what an operating agreement does. It makes sure that the people who come together to start a business still like each other at the end of the day, because it's a backdrop. Like in a successful partnership, you never look at it again because things are going fine. The people who look at their operating agreement is when there's problems. And if you already have problems and you don't have one to look to, the problems are going to get worse. So it is more expensive to craft a multi-member operating agreement because we have to go through this whole conversation, this sort of crucial conversation about all of these elements, and then put that into your operating agreement. No one operating agreement is the same if done right. That should not be like a fillable form because there's so many nuances to it based on the industry, based on the relationship of the partners, based on where the capital is. Just a lot of nuances, and you really have to have that initial conversation to go through all of those elements, and along with the lawyer who understands and has ideally some examples of what can go wrong if you don't have these conversations. So many. I'm in the midst of one right now with 2 physicians that is just, they probably paid me and the other attorney more money than is even over a dispute right now because they didn't have these things worked out, these basic operational decisions. They just didn't work them out in advance. And now there's money at stake. And now people have hurt feelings and no one's willing to come to the table. So a good operating agreement, partnership agreement, or in the case of a corporation, shareholder agreement is worth its weight in gold if you start making money in that business, because it just gives you a safety net for if something starts to go amiss or accidental things happen, death, for instance. The last thing you necessarily intended was to become partners with your partner's spouse, which can happen if you haven't addressed it.
Anything special with potential partners in spouse that you need to cover in that operating agreement?
Yeah, generally what you want to make sure you address is that in the event of a death, that there's the ability to repurchase that interest at a purchase price that makes sense for the business. You want to protect against a divorce. So if there's a divorce between your partner and his or her spouse, technically a membership interest is equitable property. And if it was earned during the marriage, then it's subject to division by the court if you haven't addressed it in the agreement. So these are all important things, and from and it protects the entire company to have those provisions in there, because the last thing you want is, again, a spouse that's about to be divorced, getting their hands on the business or having some equity stake or somehow like creating pressure on cash flows out of the business.
Great.
I think we may have a question. I thought Kia had a question.
Yep.
Hi, I do have a question. I was wondering if publication means only newspaper. Can you be published in a local magazine?
It's newspapers. In fact, the local clerk's office sort of maintains the list of authorized papers that you can publish in.
Okay, so that's
you publish in the county in which your business is primarily located. And so you have to use one of the authorized publications in that county.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So Katie, let's, again, one of the things we try to get our clients to start thinking about is a BAL list: bankers, accountants, insurance, and lawyer. And one of the things we tell them to do is they really need to be able to find the individuals that are going to really do well with them. They're going to, click with and be able to be there for them when they need it. Because you're not always going to need the lawyer, or you're
Right.
not always going to, you buy your insurance. You want to check on it, and your accountant, working with your accountant to set things up. What are some of the things that you really need to look for or should be able to ask and interview a potential lawyer to work with you?
Yeah, I think this is crucial. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard a client come to me after they've already hired their, sister's lawyer who did her house closing, or their mom's lawyer who just ever did their estate planning. And they had a bad experience. Because the reality is, much like with physicians who have niches, you don't go to an orthopedic surgeon, because your stomach hurts. It's the same kind of thing in law. If you're looking for a business lawyer, and so you need to speak with business lawyers. So chances are the person who did your real estate closing is not the person you want to talk to. You want to talk to somebody who has experience representing businesses. So the kind of questions you want to ask those folks, and whether it's formation or other business questions, is how do they work with their clients? Are they exclusively on an hourly billing rate, meaning they bill by the hour? Or do they offer fixed fees for certain services? To ask them, what kinds of clients they've represented in the past, how available they are if you need to reach them, what their turnaround time is, and also whether you'll be working with them or someone else in their firm. So if you reach out and talk to a larger firm occasionally, and chances are sometimes you won't necessarily work with the attorney you spoke to out of the gate. That attorney, if they're busy or if it's not their primary area of focus, will refer you to somebody else in their office or to an associate, so a younger lawyer who works with them. It doesn't mean that the work product is any less, less than. It just means ultimately the person you thought you hired isn't the person you're working with, and that may be a mismatch. So that's just something that's another question to ask. But I would say the number one question is to really understand their fees. There's a decent number of firms, and because this is the traditional structure of law firms, who bill by the hour. And that is how law has been for a long, long time. It's changing, and you can now purchase legal services on fixed fee in some traditional firms. But a lot still do the bill by the hour, which can result in surprise bills, which I think is just the bane of most startups' existence, because you weren't counting on spending that amount of money. So it's really critical to understand how they charge. For instance, if you call them and ask a question, are you going to get billed for that? It may be that it's appropriate that you get billed for it, but just make sure you understand what you're signing up for. And I would say 100%, if you do not click with the person you speak to, there's plenty of other lawyers out there. Find one that you do. Lawyers run the gamut. There are some, and I was mentioning this to Barb earlier. I got off the phone with a client earlier this morning who said, just thank you for explaining this to me in English, because the last lawyer I spoke to, by the time I got off the phone, I was more confused than when I started. So if you leave the call confused, that's not your fault. I would say that's a lawyer that's not the right lawyer for you, and try somebody else.
Right.
The other thing I would say is go ahead and feel free to Google these people. If they don't have a public presence, then they probably haven't been doing this enough in this particular area. If they're not on the internet with a business law practice that's clear and well established, then this is not their niche.
Well, I think it's so important, as you stated. It's like we go to physicians for specific things, lawyers, the same lawyer we'd use for real estate isn't the same one used for a will, and would not be the same one for developing a business. So that's a great point to do some shopping there.
Absolutely.
One of the things we talked about is where to form your entity. like what state and why would we want to do it in a specific state?
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that I have regularly as well, because, it's pretty cool to form in Delaware, and now it's really hip to form in Wyoming. So if you want to be with the cool kids, you go and form in Wyoming, because they've kept the fees as completely low as possible out in Wyoming. The problem with that, and the problem with forming anywhere that is not New York, is that if you're doing business in New York, you still need to register in New York, and there's more fees. So generally, unless you are planning on fundraising for significant capital for your business, like millions, then there's no reason to be anything other than a New York entity. Now, if you're going to be if your primary place of business is outside New York, then that's a different conversation. But if you're running your business from New York, you should be a New York entity, absent some desire to, again, if you're planning to launch a tech firm and raise millions in capital, yeah, we should set you up in Delaware, because there's no point having to later convert you to Delaware. But for the most part, New York is where you belong right now.
As you talk about Delaware, Wyoming, and New York, can you just talk to, because I've had the question posed to me also, if I form my entity in New York, does that mean that I'm protected in other states, or is it just New York? Because sometimes I think the perception is because I'm incorporated, regardless of where I'm incorporated, I'm protected elsewhere.
Well, that's mostly true, because ultimately when you incorporate, and states in the United States respect entities, then you are, because as long as you are operating inside your entity. So one of the things I say to clients is just take care, like don't go signing things in your own personal name. Make sure you look at any contract you're signing that it's the name of your entity as the party and not you. Make sure that it's your entity is on the website disclaimers and privacy policies. Always lead with your entity. As long as you are, that entity is a separate person under the law. You are not a part of that. It is its own person as far as these other states go, as far as creditors go. And that's why it's essential wherever you are performing business that you always engage through the entity. And that's what gives you the protection.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm going to put it out there again to anybody on Facebook or on live here on our Zoom meeting. If there are any questions you'd like to ask of Katie, again, this is the Power Hour, and we've got Katie Centolella on here to be able to help you better understand your needs and requirements for your entities as you're formulating your business. So I don't think we've got anything else, but on as far as questions. But Katie, can you talk a little bit about, as a company is growing and as a company might want to bring on investors, what will that look like, and how will that impact that entity?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, the type of entity it is will weigh in on the type of investment that's possible. So when you invest in an LLC, you're ultimately investing in the membership units or interests. When you're investing in a corporation, you're generally investing in stock. The other very sort of common way to invest these days, particularly in early funding, is what we call convertible notes that are debt instruments, but they have these rights to convert into equity in whether it's an LLC or a corporation. So those have become more and more common, particularly in smaller companies, because they're not hard to put in place. They're very simple to put in place. But key to going into any investment structure is to understand where you are now and what your legal structure is now and what you need to protect. So one of the biggest mistakes customers or clients have when they go take on money is they give up too much control, right? These investors, they want a piece of the pie, but they don't necessarily need the voting too. So it's really make sure you're clear that when you go to an investor and try to get capital, they're not giving away the vote. In a lot of ways we do that is to have separate classes of ownership, whether it's an LLC or a corporation. We create either non-voting and voting classes, or we create higher voting classes. So for instance, a class A share that has 100 votes per share. And that you as the owner is the only, or you, the founders are the only owners of those class A shares. The equity is the same, meaning your return on value is the same per share, but the vote is higher. That helps you retain control. I mean, most entrepreneurs do not want to give up their baby, the control and the direction and the vision and these big decisions. And so that's essential to make sure that your governing documents basically divide equity from control, and so that you can maintain control while still giving away a decent chunk of equity to get the investment in. So that taking a hard look at your documents and making sure they're structured right. Regularly in my work, I'm either amending certificates of incorporation or I'm changing operating agreements to create multiple classes when it's time to go for investment, so that we can do that and keep equity separate from vote.
You know, I really like that because I just had a client that's done some of that, and the question about the voting, that's really
yeah,
important.
it's an easy way to keep what the founders really care about. It's not that they don't care about, you know, money in return, but they care about their vision and implementing it the right way. And they don't want strangers or some outside group to have too much say on that. And so that's the way you do that.
Great. Heidi's got a question. Heidi, would you like to ask yourself?
Sure, thank you. So if we, in our initial meeting with you, what information should we bring with us in order to be able to decide what, if we want to be an LLC, and then what we need to do to go forward so that we're not going back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it in that initial meeting is if you, whatever you have, like if you have a business plan, if you have any financials, if you have any customer agreements in place already, that's great for me to see because I can quickly kind of assess from that. But a lot of times people don't have that, and so it's a conversation. And I go through my own checklist of what I want to make sure I cover so that I can help get a good handle on your risks as well as your vision and where you're going. Because not just your risks today, it's also, all right, where you're going to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, because I don't want to send you down the wrong path.
That's a great question, Heidi. So thank you for
Yeah.
it. It's like, yeah, well, what do I bring?
Yeah.
You know, just my brain dump, you know, but you really want to
Definitely.
be organized and be able to be succinct to answer the questions so that you can get the best thing. So thank you for that. Anything else, Heidi? You're good? Okay. All right. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to, as we're wrapping up, like to share, Katie, to put this pretty bow on this?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, because it has been
Sure,
so informational.
Yeah, I would say the other thing, the one other topic that we haven't touched on that comes up a lot with these younger businesses that is often regularly overlooked and concerns me, and we touched on it a bit, and that's like online sales, but ultimately it's websites, and it's websites terms of use, website privacy policies, and as well as if there do happen to be sales on a website, making sure you have terms of sales. Those documents are really important to protect against risk, and they tend to be those documents that get put on the back burner of like, or they're very much DIY'd. They're copied from somebody else's website, and you can get 80, 85, 90% of the way there by copying somebody else's that looks comparable to yours. So that's always an area where I at least ask the question of, do you have these? Like, even if they're copied, it's still better to have something than nothing on your website if you have a website. But ultimately, if that's another area of risk that comes up in a young company, is making sure your website documents are solid.
Right. Dana,
Okay, I have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay. You guys, okay,
So
go ahead.
I have a website and I just made that, like I just made it up.
Yeah, so you probably are missing things. Because and it depends also on where you're selling. If you're selling outside of New York, or if you're selling, particularly if you're also selling outside of the United States, if you're selling to, and or your website is accessed by people who might be under the age of 16, there's a variety, there's a whole category of risk and things that you need to comply with. And also, these documents help protect you. Like, that's where you put all the confidentiality language, copyright language. You put additional provisions to ensure that nobody can copy your stuff. If you've put stuff on your website that is your proprietary sort of process or information or publications, you want to protect those, and that needs to be in your terms.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great, great. Dana, anything else?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Katie too, because I think that this was very informational. I think it was great information. And I know we talked about this a little earlier, but sometimes when you're starting a new business, it can be intimidating to think about having to have a discussion with an attorney. And so I want to say thank you for putting it in layman's terms and for being able to attend today and to speak with everyone.
Oh, I'm happy to. Happy to. If you
Great.
think of any other topics, I'd be happy to come back on whatever else is pressing.
All right, great.
Katie, I have
Thank-
just one thing to add. Can you talk a little bit about like keeping your business above board once you get established? I know that that's one thing that I'm always kind of a little bit confused by.
That is a great point to sort of wrap up, and that is annual compliance. Just because you form an entity doesn't mean it's going to last you in perpetuity with no upkeep, much like, you know, keeping your car in shape. You have to, and now corporations, you have to have an annual meeting. LLCs, you don't have to, but it is good practice. In New York, you have every 2 years, you have to file a biennial statement that sort of updates New York on where you stand. So what we like to do with our clients is every year send them a questionnaire and do a set of annual resolutions. Doesn't mean you have to meet, but it just helps make it clear that this is your entity, you're following the law, you're treating it like a separate person, you're approving transactions that maybe you didn't actually formally approve during the year, you know, because technically an entity operates based on the decisions of its managers or its members in the LLC case, or its board or officers in the corporation case. And if you're just sort of willy-nilly just making decisions and you're not documenting those, like then you're potentially exposing yourself as not using your corporation. They call it piercing the corporate veil, meaning you're not really using it. You're just basically acting on your own accord. And we don't want that. What we want you is to have annual meeting minutes that say, hey, I'm using this business and here's my officers and here's the board and here's and we approved all the actions for last year. In organizations where you have a partnership and maybe you have buyout terms, each year we also set a value that's been agreed upon so that if somebody dies, you don't have to go pay for a valuation. You don't have to just debate what the value is. You've agreed. It's in your annual meeting minutes. So in my firm, we do that as a matter of course for all our corporate clients. And we send out a notice every year and say, here's what you did last year. Do you want is there changes? And here's your set of new meeting minutes. And likewise on your biennial filing, a little tickler, hey, it's time. Do you want us to update your filing? Are you going to do your filing? So those things, although they're the minutia, they're the things that if you get sued and they're not done regularly, you've got additional exposure. So that's a great point, Sarah. Like just nice upkeep is a really good habit to get into with your entities. It's something we help our clients remember to do and help them with, and it's also a great question to ask any lawyer you might engage with is, what's your process for making sure that we stay in compliance?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very helpful.
Good point.
Thank you. And I think the important thing here is, and we keep saying this, you don't have to go it alone. So find the appropriate people that you need on your team. That's why we're here for to help you in your launching your business and developing your business, no matter where you are in your business, and you need that team along with you as you on your journey. So one of the things that Katie has graciously said that she will do free consultations for everybody that's here on this Power Hour. So if you take a look at the link, our Calendarly link in the chat box, you can copy that. And we really appreciate you being here, Katie. And again, it's been a great Power Hour. And so hopefully we'll have you back again and I take it up to another level on your legal entity as things evolve for different clients. But again, I'm going to put a little commercial in for the Y Center. So this is the Y Center. And we have got one-to-one free counseling. Don't do it on your own. We will connect you with the people that you need to be able to put that and launch that business and continue growing your business, because that's really important. Please join us if you're interested in really developing a business plan. And it's tough. It's a lot of work. but it's really, really good. And you have a lot of dialogue with a lot of the other people in the cohort. Plus this cohort, we're going to be bringing in some subject matter experts in between the sessions to be able to help you on your journey of putting your plan together. And also, please come and see us October 6th at the Y Center for our first open house, after COVID. So this is exciting to be able to get people out. It's like one of the first things I did when I first quit my corporate job, and I said, I wanted to meet women, business women. I went to the Y Center, and it was great to be able to meet so many wonderful women, and you really learn a lot from others. You learn a lot from everyone's experiences. So please, love to see you. Katie, we'd love to see you there too, if you can make it.
Yes.
And so ladies, Dana, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
All
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a great rest of your rainy Wednesday. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.